72 hours before Ainsley Grant became a sniper, her biggest concern was a discrepancy in the ammunition inventory logs. The morning sun hammered down on forward operating base Griffin like a physical weight. September in Helmand Province meant temperatures pushing 115 degrees by noon. The air tasted like dust and diesel fuel. Ainsley sat in the dim coolness of the supply depot, her eyes scanning spreadsheets on a battered laptop that took 30 seconds to load each page. 7,200 rounds of 5.56 millimeter NATO ammunition, cataloged, verified, and ready for distribution. The M240B machine gun belts were organized by lot number. The 50 caliber BMG rounds sat in their specialized containers, each one accounted for down to the last cartridge. Everything in its place, everything documented with obsessive precision. This was what Ainsley understood: order, systems, predictability. She was 24 years old, originally from Butte, Montana, where her father had worked in the copper mines until a cave-in crushed 3 vertebrae in his lower back. Her mother taught elementary school and stretched every dollar until it screamed. When Ainsley graduated high school, college wasn't even discussed. The family needed money, not more debt. The Army recruited heavily in towns like Butte. Good pay, benefits, job training, and a chance to see something beyond the same gray mountains she'd stared at her entire life. Ainsley signed the papers 2 weeks after her 18th birthday. Basic training nearly broke her. The drill sergeant had screamed until veins bulged in his neck. She'd run until her legs felt like rubber bands. She'd crawled through mud under barbed wire while instructors fired blank rounds over her head. 3 recruits in her platoon quit in the first week. Ainsley had wanted to quit every single day, but quitting meant going home with nothing. Quitting meant her father had sacrificed his back for nothing. Quitting meant she was exactly as small as that gray Montana town had always made her feel. So she didn't quit. She pushed through every obstacle with stubborn, grinding determination. Not because she was brave, because the alternative was unacceptable. After basic training, she'd specialized in logistics and supply chain management. It wasn't glamorous. Nobody would write stories about the person who counted bullets and verified serial numbers on equipment. But it suited her methodical mind. She was good with numbers and details. She never forgot an order or miscounted inventory. Her superiors noticed her reliability quickly. Eventually, they assigned her here, Forward Operating Base Griffin, middle of nowhere Afghanistan, where insurgents controlled the surrounding territory and every supply convoy was a potential ambush. Ainsley closed the laptop and wiped sweat from her forehead. Even in the shade, the heat was oppressive. She checked her watch. 1,100 hours. Lunch in the mess hall meant sitting with the same 3 people she ate with every day. Briggs, the mechanic from Texas, who could rebuild a Humvee engine blindfolded and had opinions about everything from football to foreign policy. Keller, the communications specialist, who handled the encrypted radio systems and told terrible jokes with perfect comedic timing. And Marcus Vaughn, the combat medic who had saved more lives than he could count and never talked about any of them. They were good people, as close to friends as you could have in a place like this. The mess hall smelled like industrial cleaner and overcooked meat. Ainsley grabbed a tray of something that might have been chicken and found Marcus sitting alone in the corner. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. She sat down across from him without asking permission. That's how it worked here. You didn't wait for invitations. Marcus looked up and managed a tired smile. Inventory day? Every day is inventory day. Ainsley poked at her chicken. It had the texture of rubber. You look like hell. Medevac came in at 0300, IED casualty. Kid was 19. Marcus stared at his coffee. Couldn't save his legs. Ainsley didn't know what to say to that. She never knew what to say when Marcus talked about his work. Her job involved spreadsheets and climate-controlled storage. His involved blood and screaming and making impossible decisions about who lived and who didn't. They ate in silence for a while. Then Marcus set down his fork and looked at her with sudden intensity. "You should learn more than just logistics." Ainsley blinked. "What?" "There are training opportunities on base. Combat first aid, weapons handling, navigation. Most support personnel ignore them." He leaned forward. "But everyone should know how to defend themselves, how to help others in an emergency. I went through basic combat training. I know how to shoot." "When was the last time you actually fired a weapon?" Ainsley thought about it. Basic training, 18 months ago. She'd qualified with the M4 carbine, hit enough targets to pass, and hadn't touched a rifle since. "That's what I thought." Marcus pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket and slid it across the table. "Master Sergeant Morse runs an optional program, Tuesday and Thursday evenings. Show up if you want to be more than just a name on a casualty list." He stood up, grabbed his tray, and walked away before Ainsley could respond. She looked at the paper. Crude handwriting listed times and a location on the far side of the base. At the bottom, a single sentence. "Every soldier holds the line when the moment demands it." Ainsley folded the paper and put it in her pocket. She probably wouldn't go. She had inventory to manage, reports to file. Her job was important enough without adding extra complications. But that evening, after finishing her logistics duties, she found herself walking toward the coordinates Marcus had written down. The shooting range sat at the edge of the base, surrounded by blast barriers and overlooked by a guard tower. Even at 1800 hours, the heat was brutal. Ainsley approached a small group of soldiers standing near a weapons rack. Most were younger than her. Support personnel by the look of them. People who worked in communications or vehicle maintenance or administrative roles. An older man stood facing them. He had to be in his late 60s, which made him ancient by military standards. His face was weathered and creased like old leather. Scars ran down both forearms. He walked with a slight limp, favoring his left leg, but his eyes were sharp and alert. When he looked at Ainsley, she felt evaluated and measured in about 3 seconds. "You're new." His voice was gravelly, like he'd spent decades shouting over gunfire. "Name?" "Ainsley Grant, logistics specialist." "Morse, Master Sergeant, retired. You know how to shoot?" "I qualified in basic training." "That means nothing." He walked to the weapons rack and pulled out an M4 carbine. "This is an M4, 5.56 millimeter, effective range 300 meters. You'll start here." He handed her the rifle. It felt heavier than she remembered. The metal was hot from sitting in the sun. Morse spent the next 20 minutes going over fundamentals. How to load the magazine, how to achieve a proper sight picture, how to breathe before pulling the trigger. His teaching style was direct and efficient. No wasted words, no encouragement or criticism. Just information delivered with the expectation that she would absorb it. Finally, he pointed downrange at paper targets set at 100 yards. "Show me what basic training taught you." Ainsley positioned herself at the firing line. Her hands were sweating inside her gloves. She pressed the rifle stock against her shoulder, found the front sight post, and tried to remember everything from 18 months ago. Breathe slowly. Squeeze, don't pull. Follow through. She fired 5 rounds in careful succession. The rifle kicked against her shoulder with each shot. The smell of gunpowder filled her nostrils. When she lowered the weapon, Morse walked down range without comment. He examined her target, then turned back toward her. His expression was unreadable. He returned and took the rifle from her hands. "Look at your grouping." Ainsley squinted at the target. Her 5 shots had punched through the paper in a cluster about the size of her fist, all of them within a few inches of the center. "Most beginners scatter rounds everywhere," Morse said quietly. "Their hands shake. They flinch. They pull the trigger instead of squeezing it." He looked at her with those sharp eyes. "You did none of those things. Your grouping is tight. Your shots are controlled." He paused, and something shifted in his expression. Not quite approval, but recognition. You have natural talent. Most people don't. That means you should develop it. Over the following weeks, Ainsley showed up every Tuesday and Thursday evening. The training became a rhythm she looked forward to. Her logistics work was important, but it was also monotonous. The same spreadsheets, the same inventory counts, the same reports filed in the same format. The shooting range was different. There was immediate feedback. Either the bullet went where she intended or it didn't. No ambiguity, no paperwork, just physics and skill and concentration. Morse taught with quiet intensity. He explained the science behind marksmanship, how wind affected bullet trajectory, how temperature changed powder burn rates, how breathing at the wrong moment could shift point of impact by several inches. By the third week, he introduced her to different weapon systems. The M240B machine gun, the M249 squad automatic weapon. Each one had different characteristics, different recoil patterns, different effective ranges. Then in the sixth week, he brought out something different. The M110 semi-automatic sniper system sat on the bench like a piece of precision machinery, which is exactly what it was. Longer than the M4, heavier, a powerful scope mounted on top. This wasn't a rifle for spraying bullets at close targets. This was for surgical precision at extreme distances. Morse handled it with reverence. 7.62 millimeter NATO, effective range 800 meters, semi-automatic so you can put rounds downrange faster than bolt-action systems. He looked at her. But it requires perfect trigger discipline. Any flinch gets magnified through the scope. He set up targets at 300 yards, tiny dots in the distance. Ainsley settled behind the rifle. The scope brought the world into sharp focus. She could see individual staple holes in the paper target. Through the magnified view, 300 yards felt like 50. Morse's voice was calm beside her. Breathe slowly. Let half the breath out. Hold. Squeeze. The rifle bucked harder than the M4. The boom was louder, deeper. Through the scope, Ainsley watched the bullet punch through the paper just left of center. Wind, Morse said. You didn't account for the crosswind. Try again. She made the adjustment. The second shot hit dead center. By the end of the session, she'd put 9 out of 10 rounds within a 6-inch circle at 300 yards. Her shoulder ached from the recoil. Her eyes were tired from staring through the scope. But something inside her felt settled and calm in a way it rarely did. Morse was quiet as they cleaned the weapons. Finally, he spoke without looking at her. You could do this professionally. Sniper school, precision marksman courses. He paused. You have the temperament for it. Patience, no ego, ability to stay still and wait. Ainsley laughed, uncomfortable with the suggestion. I'm happy with logistics. I don't need to be a hero. It's not about being a hero. Morse's voice was sharp. It's about using the abilities you have. Not everyone can do what you're doing right now. Most people can't. He turned to look at her directly. I've been teaching marksmanship for 25 years, trained hundreds of soldiers. You're in the top 5% of natural shooters I've ever seen. Ainsley didn't know how to respond to that. She mumbled something about just being lucky and helped finish cleaning the weapons in silence. But Morse's words stayed with her. She thought about them during her inventory duties. She thought about them lying in her bunk at night, listening to the desert wind howl outside. Could she really do more than count bullets? The question felt dangerous, like opening a door she might not be able to close. September turned toward October. The training sessions continued. Ainsley's skills improved steadily. Morse started teaching her advanced concepts, how to calculate bullet drop at extreme ranges, how to read mirage through the scope to estimate wind, how the Coriolis effect from Earth rotation could shift bullets at distances beyond 1,000 yards. One evening, after a particularly good session, Morse invited her to sit on the tailgate of his truck. He produced 2 bottles of water from a cooler and handed her one. They sat in silence watching the sun set over the desert. The sky turned orange and purple. In this light, you could almost forget the war happening just beyond the blast barriers. I had a daughter, Morse said suddenly. She'd be about your age now, 24, 25. Ainsley turned to look at him, surprised. He never talked about personal matters. Haven't spoken to her in 6 years. His voice was flat, but pain edged every word. She said I chose the army over family, said I was never there when it mattered. She's probably right. He took a long drink of water. I gave the military 25 years, deployed to Grenada in 83, Panama in 89, Desert Storm in 91, came home with scars and stories, but I missed birthdays and graduations and every moment that actually mattered to her. Morse turned to look at Ainsley. His eyes were wet. My wife died of cancer in 2008. My daughter didn't even call to tell me until 3 days after the funeral. That's when I knew I'd failed at the things that were supposed to matter most. Ainsley didn't know what to say. She'd never seen this side of him, the vulnerable, broken parts beneath the hard exterior. Why are you telling me this? She asked quietly. Because you remind me of her. That same determination, that same quiet strength. He looked away, back at the sunset. Teaching you feels like a second chance, like maybe I can do right by someone, even if I failed with her. The weight of that confession settled between them. Ainsley understood suddenly why Morse invested so much time in these training sessions, why he showed up every week even though he was retired and had no official obligations, why he cared so much whether she developed her abilities. She wasn't just a student, she was a proxy for the daughter he'd lost. I'm sorry, Ainsley said, because nothing else seemed adequate. Don't be sorry, just don't waste what you have. Morse stood up stiffly, his bad leg making him wince. Talent is rare. Purpose is rarer. If you ever find both together, you hold on to them. Mid-October brought news of Operation Valkyrie. The briefing took place in a secured room with maps covering every wall. Ainsley sat in the back with other support personnel, trying to make sense of the tactical overlays and grid coordinates. Lieutenant Boone Garrett stood at the front of the room. He was a compact man in his mid-30s, with a thick Alabama accent and the kind of quiet confidence that came from leading men in combat for over a decade. SEAL team operator, the kind of soldier who made difficult look effortless. He explained the mission with clinical precision. Intelligence indicated a Taliban weapons cache 18 miles north of the base. High-value target confirmed on site. A 14-man SEAL team would insert by helicopter under cover of darkness. They would approach the compound on foot, neutralize enemy fighters, and extract before dawn. The mission required support personnel, someone to manage ammunition resupply, someone to carry extra medical equipment, someone who could stay close to the action but wouldn't panic under pressure. Garrett's eyes scanned the room. I need a volunteer from logistics. Someone reliable who won't freeze up if things get complicated. Ainsley's hand went up before she consciously decided to raise it. Garrett nodded. Grant, you're on the manifest. Report to the armory at 2200 hours tomorrow for gear issue. That was it. No discussion, no second guessing. She'd volunteered, and now she was committed. After the briefing, Morse found her outside the building. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You don't have to do this, he finally said. Logistics specialists aren't required to go outside the wire. I know. Ainsley felt strangely calm about the whole thing. But they need someone reliable. You've been telling me for weeks that I'm capable of more than I think. Maybe it's time to prove it. Morse studied her face. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small leather notebook. The cover was worn smooth from years of handling. He pressed it into her hands. Started writing this in 1983. Every lesson I learned the hard way. Every mistake that almost got me killed. Every piece of wisdom worth passing on. Ainsley opened it carefully. Pages filled with sketches, calculations, handwritten observations, wind drift tables, range estimation techniques, notes on breath control and trigger discipline. "I can't take this," she protested. "This is yours." "It's yours now." Morse's voice was firm. "Trust what I taught you. You're ready for more than carrying boxes. You've always been ready. You just needed the right circumstances to see it." He gripped her shoulder once, hard, then walked away without looking back. The night before the mission, Ainsley lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling. The fan spun slowly overhead, moving hot air in lazy circles. She could hear other soldiers in nearby bunks, breathing, shifting, one person talking quietly in their sleep. She thought about her parents back in Montana, her father with his ruined back, sitting in the living room watching television because standing hurt too much. Her mother grading papers at the kitchen table, her reading glasses sliding down her nose. Her younger brother who was starting community college and working 2 jobs to pay for it. They had no idea what she was about to do. They thought she counted supplies in a secure warehouse. They thought she was safe. Maybe she would be safe. The briefing made it sound straightforward. Stay 50 yards back from the action. Distribute ammunition as needed. The SEALs would handle the dangerous work. But something in Morse's eyes when he gave her that notebook suggested he knew better. Suggested that plans rarely survive contact with reality. Ainsley pulled the notebook from under her pillow and flipped through it by the dim light of a battery-powered lantern. Page after page of hard-won knowledge. On the inside back cover, she found an inscription she hadn't noticed before. Written in Morse's careful handwriting, "Ainsley, you'll hit a wall. Everyone does. When you want to quit, remember, the only failure is stopping before you're finished. Everything else is just a temporary setback. You've got this. You've always had this. Callahan Morse." Dated September 14th, the day before she'd raised her hand to volunteer for this mission. He'd known. Somehow he'd known she would end up here. The helicopter ride toward the operation zone felt like descending into hell. Ainsley sat in the Black Hawk surrounded by 14 SEALs who checked their weapons with mechanical efficiency. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were the rotor blades chopping through the night air and the occasional crackle of radio communication between the pilots. It was September 12th, 0230 hours. The desert stretched black and empty beneath them, visible only as darker shapes against a dark sky. Stars overhead burned with crystalline clarity. Ainsley checked her gear for the 100th time. 320 rounds of 7.62 millimeter ammunition distributed in 16 magazines across her vest. Medical trauma kit strapped to her thigh. 6 liters of water. M4 carbine loaded with a full magazine, safety engaged, barrel pointed down. Everything in its place, everything accounted for. Across from her sat Corporal Garrett Sullivan. Everyone called him Reaper, though Ainsley didn't know why. He was 28 years old, from Montana, like her, with the kind of icy calm that never seemed to crack, regardless of circumstances. His primary weapon was an M110 SAS, the same precision rifle Morse had been training her on. Sullivan caught her looking and nodded once. No words needed, just acknowledgement between 2 people from the same cold mountains who'd somehow ended up in this hot desert preparing to do violence. The helicopter banked slightly, adjusting course. Ainsley's stomach lurched. She gripped the seat harness and focused on breathing slowly. In through the nose, out through the mouth, like Morse had taught her. Lieutenant Garrett's voice came through everyone's headsets. Calm, professional. 5 minutes to insertion. Final checks. The SEALs moved in perfect synchronization, checking magazines, adjusting night vision mounts, securing gear that might rattle or shift during movement. These men had done this hundreds of times. For them, this was routine. For Ainsley, it was anything but. 2 minutes out, the world exploded. The pilot's voice cracked with sudden urgency. "RPG! RPG! Brake right!" The helicopter jerked violently sideways. Through the open door, Ainsley saw streaks of light racing up from the darkness below. Tracer rounds, dozens of them, green fingers reaching toward the aircraft with murderous intent. This wasn't supposed to happen. The intelligence briefing said the area would be clear until they reached the compound. Someone had gotten it wrong. Fatally wrong. Lieutenant Garrett was shouting orders, but the words were lost in the chaos. A sound like thunder striking metal. The helicopter shuddered. Warning lights flashed red throughout the cabin. The smell of burning hydraulic fluid filled Ainsley's nostrils. The aircraft spun. The horizon tilted at impossible angles. Ainsley's head slammed against the bulkhead despite her harness. Stars exploded across her vision. Her ears filled with a high-pitched ringing that drowned out everything else. The ground rushed up to meet them. The pilot was fighting for control, pulling every trick he knew to keep them airborne. The Black Hawk leveled at the last possible second, but the landing was brutal beyond anything Ainsley had imagined. Impact, metal screaming, the aircraft bouncing once, twice, then sliding sideways across rocky sand. The sound was apocalyptic. Rotor blades disintegrating, structural supports bending, a dust cloud engulfing everything. Then, stillness. Terrible, ringing stillness. Ainsley's hands moved on autopilot. Unbuckle harness, grab rifle, check for injuries. Her head throbbed, blood trickled from somewhere on her scalp, but she could move, she could think. The SEALs were already in motion, pouring out of the damaged helicopter into the night. Lieutenant Garrett was dragging the unconscious pilot from his seat. The co-pilot was bleeding from a head wound, but conscious enough to stumble. Bullets began snapping through the air, the distinctive crack of rounds passing close. Enemy fighters had seen the crash. They were moving in. Ainsley stumbled out of the helicopter on legs that didn't feel entirely connected to her body. The desert stretched in all directions under a sky full of cold stars. Muzzle flashes sparked in the darkness about 180 yards west. She could hear shouting in a language she didn't understand. The SEALs established a defensive perimeter with practiced speed. Lieutenant Garrett was everywhere at once, positioning men, directing fire, assessing the situation. One SEAL named Griffin had the M240B machine gun up and running, pouring suppressive fire toward the enemy positions. Sullivan scrambled up onto a rocky outcropping 30 feet away. He set up his M110 SAS with quick, efficient movements. Within seconds, the rifle spoke. A deep boom that echoed across the desert. Pause. Another boom. Through the darkness, insurgents began dropping at distances Ainsley could barely see. She dropped to the sand beside a SEAL and opened her supply pack. This was her job: distribute ammunition, keep the fighters supplied. She crawled from position to position, delivering fresh magazines and collecting empties. Bullets kicked up sand around her. One round passed so close she felt the displacement of air against her cheek. But she kept moving, because this was what she'd trained for. This was why she'd volunteered. Do the job. Don't think. Just do the job. Sullivan's rifle continued its methodical work. Every 8 to 10 seconds, another boom. Another insurgent eliminated. He was their lifeline. As long as that rifle kept talking, it kept the enemy at a distance they couldn't effectively engage from. Then, at 0312 hours, everything changed. Sullivan shifted position to get a better angle on an insurgent machine gun nest that was beginning to find their range. He exposed himself for just a moment, just one moment. The crack of the incoming round was different from the others. Sharper, more focused. A sniper on the other side had been waiting for exactly this opportunity. The bullet found the gap between Sullivan's shoulder and his body armor plate. The impact spun him around and slammed him against the rocks. His M110 SAS clattered away across the stone. Blood began spreading dark across his uniform. Marcus was moving before Sullivan hit the ground. The combat medic covered 30 feet in seconds, medical kit already in his hands. He reached Sullivan and immediately went to work. Pressure on the wound, packing it with quick clot gauze, starting an IV line with one hand while maintaining pressure with the other. Sullivan was conscious, but in shock. Ainsley could hear him from her position. Can't shoot. Rifle. Lieutenant Garrett's voice cut through the radio traffic, urgent but controlled. We need that gun position active. Sullivan's down. Who can shoot? No one answered. The other SEALs were fully engaged in their sectors. Marcus was treating Sullivan. The pilots were wounded. And the enemy, sensing the loss of that devastating precision fire, were growing bolder, moving closer, their shots becoming more accurate. Ainsley stared at the M110 SAS lying abandoned on the rocks 30 feet away. Starlight glinted off the scope. That rifle had been controlling the entire battlefield. Every time it spoke, insurgents died or took cover or lost their courage. Now it sat silent. Through that rifle, Sullivan had protected everyone. Without it, they would be overrun within minutes. Morse's voice echoed in her memory. You're ready for more than you know. Her body moved before her conscious mind caught up. She dropped her supply pack. Her legs carried her scrambling up the rocky outcropping toward Sullivan's position. She heard Lieutenant Garrett yell something behind her, but the words didn't register. There was only the rifle. Only the need. Her hands closed around the M110 SASS. Heavy. Familiar from all those training sessions. But this wasn't the range at FOB Griffin. This was real. This was life and death. Ainsley positioned herself exactly where Sullivan had been. Behind the rocks. The elevated position gave her a clear view of the approaches. She pressed her eye to the scope, and the world magnified dramatically. Through that powerful optic, she could see everything. Individual faces 350 yards away. Bearded men with wrapped keffiyehs and AK-47 rifles. Young men and old men. Some looked scared, some looked determined. All of them were trying to kill her and everyone she was fighting alongside. Her hands were shaking. The crosshairs wavered wildly across her field of view. This was completely different from shooting paper targets. Real people were down there. Real human beings with families and histories and futures. One of them was setting up a PKM machine gun behind a large rock. If that weapon opened fire, it would tear through the SEAL positions like a chainsaw through paper. Ainsley centered the crosshairs on the fighter's chest. Her breath came in ragged gasps. She tried to remember everything Morse had taught her. Breathing, trigger control, follow through. Don't think about the target as a person. Focus on the mechanics. Just muscle memory and practice. She took a breath, let half of it out, held the rest. Her finger took up the slack on the trigger. Smooth pressure. Steady, steady. The rifle bucked hard against her shoulder. The boom echoed across the desert. Through the scope, she watched the insurgent drop. The PKM machine gun fell silent before it ever fired a shot. She had just killed a human being. Ainsley waited for horror, for guilt, for some overwhelming emotional reaction. But there was only a strange numbness and the immediate urgent need to find the next target. Because people were depending on her. Because this was the moment. Because she was holding the line. Her hands worked the bolt action, chambering a fresh round. The spent brass casing ejected and clinked against the rocks. She scanned for another threat. A fighter was running between positions, exposed. She led him slightly to account for his movement. Fired. He went down hard. The rifle became an extension of her body. Load, aim, breathe, fire. Each shot was a separate task requiring total concentration. She stopped thinking about the bigger picture. There was only the scope view and the trigger. Below her position, she heard Lieutenant Garrett on the radio. Surprise in his voice, but also approval. Grant's on the gun. Someone got Grant on the gun. She didn't correct him. It didn't matter. All that mattered was the next shot. The enemy fighters began taking casualties from the elevated sniper position and realized the American sniper was active again. They became more cautious, staying behind cover, limiting exposure. This was exactly what the SEALs needed. Breathing room. A chance to reorganize. Ainsley shifted her focus to high-value targets. An enemy commander directing fighters from behind a disabled vehicle. Range, approximately 520 yards. Wind, negligible. She adjusted her aim point slightly high to account for bullet drop. Held her breath. Fired. The commander dropped. The fighters around him scattered in confusion. Without clear leadership, their attack became disorganized. Some retreated. Others continued forward, but without coordination. Minutes blurred together. Ainsley lost count of her shots. The rifle grew hot from repeated fire. Sweat dripped into her eyes, making it hard to see through the scope. Her shoulder ached from the recoil. But she kept shooting because stopping meant dying. A bullet struck the rock inches from her head. Stone fragments sprayed across her face. She felt sharp stings as something cut her cheek. Blood ran down her neck, soaking into her collar. She shifted position slightly and kept firing. The wound didn't matter. Nothing mattered except maintaining this position. Then she heard the most beautiful sound imaginable, the distinctive whoop, whoop, whoop of helicopter rotors. She glanced up and saw two Apache gunships streaking across the sky like avenging angels. Their presence changed everything instantly. The Apaches opened fire with devastating effect. 30mm chain guns producing that characteristic brrr sound. Hydra rockets streaking from weapons pylons and exploding among the insurgent positions with tremendous violence. The enemy attack collapsed immediately. Fighters scattered and ran, trying to escape the aerial onslaught. It was over. Ainsley lowered the rifle. Her entire body began trembling with adrenaline crash. Every muscle felt like water. She slumped against the rocks, suddenly aware of the blood on her face, the bruise blooming on her shoulder, the ringing in her ears. Lieutenant Garrett climbed up to her position. His face was covered in dust and sweat. Blood stained his uniform from wounds she hadn't noticed during the fight. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Respect, maybe, or disbelief. "You hit?" His voice was hoarse from shouting orders. Ainsley wiped blood from her face with the back of her hand. "Still holding together, sir." He nodded slowly. "You gave us the breathing room we needed. Sullivan owes you his life." He paused. "We all do." That was all he said. But the weight behind those words was enormous. Coming from a SEAL team leader with 15 years of combat experience, those words meant everything. He turned and started climbing back down, stopped halfway, looked back at her. "Sullivan's stable. Marcus got him patched. You saved lives tonight. Don't forget that." Then he was gone, coordinating the extraction, directing his team, being the leader his men needed. Ainsley sat alone on the rocks with Sullivan's rifle across her lap. Dawn was beginning to break in the east, the sky shifting from black to deep blue to orange. Beautiful and terrible at the same time. She had killed people tonight, at least 8 that she could confirm, maybe more. The faces were already starting to blur together in her memory. Young men, old men, fighters who probably believed they were defending their homeland from invaders. She waited for the guilt to hit, the horror, the moral crisis that should come from taking human lives. But all she felt was exhausted numbness. And underneath that, something else, something she didn't want to examine too closely. Satisfaction. The knowledge that she'd performed under extreme pressure, that her shots had been clean and precise, that she'd done exactly what needed doing. Was that wrong? Was she supposed to feel worse about it? The extraction helicopters came in loud and fast. Medevac birds with red crosses painted on their sides. A security team established a perimeter while medics rushed to the wounded. Sullivan went first. They had him on a stretcher, IV bags hanging from poles. Marcus walking alongside, still giving instructions despite his own injury. The SEAL sniper's face was pale from blood loss, but he was conscious. As they carried him past Ainsley's position, he turned his head and caught her eye. He didn't say anything, just nodded once. Acknowledgement between two snipers. Recognition of what she'd done. Then Marcus. The combat medic argued with the other medics the entire time, insisting he could walk, that his leg wound was minor, that others needed treatment first. They ignored him and loaded him onto the second bird anyway. Ainsley climbed down from the rocks on shaky legs. Her body felt like it belonged to someone else. She moved through a haze of exhaustion and shock, gathered her scattered gear, picked up her supply pack, counted magazines without thinking about it. 12 empty, 4 still full. Marcus appeared beside her before boarding the helicopter. He took Sullivan's rifle from her hands, gently, reverently. Sullivan's gonna want to thank you himself when he's out of surgery. Marcus's face was gray with pain, but his eyes were clear. You pulled our asses out of the fire, Grant. Don't let anybody tell you different. He limped toward the helicopter, turned back once more. Also, you might want to see the doc about that concussion. You've got a serious head wound bleeding all over the place. Ainsley touched her scalp. Her hand came away crimson. She hadn't even noticed. Funny how pain became irrelevant when you were fighting for survival. The flight back to FOB Griffin took 20 minutes. Ainsley sat in the helicopter staring out the open door. The battlefield receded below, bodies scattered across the sand, smoke rising from destroyed vehicles, brass casings glinting in the early sunlight, evidence of violence that would be covered by desert sand within days. She thought about the faces she'd seen through the scope, wondered if they had families, children, people who would grieve them. Then she pushed those thoughts away because that path led to madness, to paralysis, to an inability to function. Morse had warned her about this. The weight you carry, the faces you see in the dark, the price of doing what needed doing. She hadn't understood then, but she was beginning to understand now. Back at FOB Griffin, everything happened in a blur. Medical processing, a doctor shining lights in her eyes and asking questions about the date and her name and how many fingers he was holding up. 8 stitches in her cheek, 12 more in her scalp. Anti-nausea medication for the concussion. Orders for 48 hours rest. Ainsley nodded and agreed to everything. Then she went to her bunk and lay down fully clothed and stared at the ceiling while her mind replayed every shot in photographic detail. Face number 1. Young man with a wispy beard, maybe 20 years old. Setting up the PKM, dropped by her first shot. Center mass, clean kill. Face number 2. Runner between positions, mid-30s. Scarred face visible even at 300 yards. Led him perfectly, dropped him mid-stride. Face number 3. The commander. Gray in his beard, authority in his posture. Eliminated and the entire attack collapsed. How many more? She'd lost count after 7 or 8, but each face was burned into her memory with perfect clarity. Young and old, scared and determined, all dead by her hand. Sleep wouldn't come, not even close. Her body was exhausted, but her mind raced like an engine stuck in high gear. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the scope view. Crosshairs settling on human targets, the kick of recoil, the knowledge that another person had stopped existing because of her actions. At 0400, she gave up trying to sleep, walked to the shower facility in the pre-dawn darkness. The water ran scalding hot. She stood under it until her skin turned red, scrubbed at the dried blood in her hair, watched pink water swirl down the drain. She scrubbed until her skin felt raw, until the water ran clear. But she still didn't feel clean, wondered if she ever would again. The mess hall was nearly empty at 0530. Ainsley poured herself a cup of coffee that tasted like battery acid and motor oil, sat at a corner table watching the sun rise over the blast barriers. Other soldiers filtered in gradually. Some glanced at her. Word had already spread about what happened during Operation Valkyrie, about the logistics specialist who became a sniper. She was no longer invisible, no longer just the quiet girl who counted bullets. People saw her differently now, saw someone who had stepped up when it mattered, saw a warrior. The attention made her want to disappear. She wasn't a warrior. She was someone who'd picked up a rifle because there was no other choice. Someone who'd done what needed doing and now had to live with the consequences. Footsteps approached. She looked up and saw Master Sergeant Callahan Morse standing beside her table. He didn't ask permission, just sat down heavily, his bad legs stretched out to the side. His weathered face showed deep concern. "How you holding up, kid?" Ainsley shrugged, sipped her terrible coffee. "I'm fine." "That's a lie." Morse's voice was gentle but firm. "Nobody's fine after their first combat, not ever." They sat in silence for a while, the mess hall gradually filling with morning personnel, voices and clatter of trays, the normal sounds of military life continuing despite the violence that had happened just hours ago. Finally, Morse spoke again. "Grenada, 1983. I was 37 years old. First time I killed someone through a scope." Ainsley looked at him. He was staring at his coffee cup like it held answers. "Insurgent at 600 yards. Clear shot, perfect conditions. I pulled the trigger and he dropped." Morse's jaw tightened. "Then I threw up behind my position, heaved my guts out while my spotter pretended not to notice." He looked up at her. His eyes were wet. Nightmares for months, his face on repeat, wondering if I could have wounded him instead, wondering if he had kids, if his wife would cry when she learned he was dead. He paused. The guilt nearly broke me. Ainsley felt something loosen in her chest, the knowledge that this legendary instructor had experienced the same horror she was feeling. "Does it get easier?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "No." Morse's answer was immediate and honest. "It never gets easier, but you learn to carry the weight better. You learn to put those faces in a box and only open it when you can handle it." He leaned forward. "Here's what matters. You did the right thing for the right reasons. Those men were trying to kill your team. You protected them. That's not murder, that's war. And war is ugly and horrible, but sometimes necessary." "I keep seeing them," Ainsley whispered, "every time I close my eyes." "You will for a long time, maybe forever." Morse reached across and gripped her hand. "But you're still you. You're still the girl from Montana who counts bullets and takes pride in doing things right. What you did last night doesn't erase that, it adds to it." He pulled back, took a drink of coffee, made a face at the taste. "I lost my daughter because I never learned to process this stuff, never talked about it, kept it locked inside until it poisoned everything." His voice cracked. "Don't make my mistakes, Ainsley. Don't let this consume you." The use of her first name hit different. He'd always called her Grant or Kid. This felt personal, like a father talking to a daughter. Tears ran down his weathered cheeks. "Teaching you has been the closest thing to redemption I'll ever get. Watching you discover what you're capable of, seeing you become something extraordinary." He looked at her directly. "That matters to me more than you'll ever know." Ainsley felt her own eyes filling. "I almost got people killed. I froze for a second before I picked up that rifle." "But you didn't freeze long. You acted. And that action saved Sullivan's life, saved Marcus, saved Lieutenant Garrett and his entire team." Morse's voice was fierce. "1 second of hesitation is human. What matters is what you did after." They sat together as the sun climbed higher. Morse shared more stories. His first kill, his worst kill, the men he'd lost, the weight he carried every day. He spoke with brutal honesty about the cost of being a sniper, the faces that never left, the moral calculus of taking life to protect life. And slowly, Ainsley began to understand that what she felt wasn't wrong. It was the price of doing something that mattered, the cost of being someone who stood when others needed you to stand. "What do I do now?" she asked finally. "You keep moving forward, one day at a time. You process what happened, you acknowledge the weight, and you decide what kind of person you want to be going forward." He stood up stiffly. "I've got to file some paperwork, but I want you to think about something. You discovered last night that you're capable of things most people aren't. The question is whether you develop that capability or walk away from it. He walked away before she could respond, left her sitting alone with her thoughts and her terrible coffee. The next 3 days passed in a haze. Ainsley tried returning to her logistics duties, sat in the supply depot staring at spreadsheets. But the numbers felt meaningless now. 7,200 rounds of ammunition. Who cared? She'd fired maybe 20 rounds and changed the outcome of an entire battle. Counting bullets seemed absurdly trivial compared to using them effectively. On the 4th day after the mission, Lieutenant Garrett requested a formal meeting. Ainsley reported to his office at 1400 hours. Her stomach churned with nervousness. She didn't know what to expect. Garrett's office was spare and organized. Maps on the walls. A single photograph of him with his SEAL team. No personal effects beyond that. He gestured for her to sit. "How are you healing up?" He got straight to business, no small talk. "Stitches itch. Concussions better. Cleared for duty." He nodded, shuffled some papers on his desk, then looked at her directly. "I'm recommending you for the Bronze Star with Valor device. Your actions during Operation Valkyrie saved multiple lives. Without someone manning that sniper position after Sullivan went down, we'd have been overrun." Ainsley opened her mouth to protest, but he held up a hand. "I've written hundreds of award citations. I know what merits recognition. What you did was exceptional. Period." He leaned back. "But that's not why I called you here." He picked up a folder. "I've been reviewing your training records, your performance scores, your evaluations from Master Sergeant Morse." He looked at her. "You have natural talent as a marksman, significant talent, the kind that shouldn't be wasted counting supplies." Here it comes, Ainsley thought. The offer, the choice. "Have you ever considered transferring to a combat specialty? Sniper school? Precision marksman courses?" "I've thought about it." Ainsley kept her voice neutral. "But I like logistics. It's important work. I'm good at it." "You're adequate at logistics. You're exceptional at shooting." Garrett's voice was firm. "Combat doesn't care about your job title. When the situation demands action, you either step up or people die. You stepped up. That shows character, shows courage." He set down the folder. "I'll support whatever decision you make. If you want to stay in logistics, that's your right. But I want you to really think about this. Not knee-jerk fear, actual consideration of what you're capable of." Ainsley felt the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. Stay safe, count bullets, live a predictable life, or embrace something terrifying and purposeful that might break her. "How much time do I have to decide?" "1 week. After that, I need an answer." He stood, indicating the meeting was over. "Talk to people you trust. Think it through. Then make the choice you can live with." She left his office more confused than when she'd entered. Walked across the base in a daze. Her feet carried her to the supply depot out of habit. She sat at her desk and stared at the inventory spreadsheets. 3 hours later, she'd accomplished nothing. The numbers blurred together. Her mind kept circling back to the same questions. Could she go back to this after experiencing what she'd experienced? Could she sit safely in a warehouse, knowing she had capabilities that could save lives in the field? Would the boredom kill her? Would the guilt of not developing her talent eat her alive? That evening, she found Marcus at the medical facility. He was treating a soldier with a sprained ankle when she arrived. After finishing, he waved her into his small office. They sat surrounded by medical supplies and anatomy posters. Marcus looked tired but healthier. His leg wound was healing, though he still moved with a slight limp. "What's on your mind, Grant?" She explained everything. Garrett's offer, the choice between safety and purpose, the fear of becoming someone who killed easily, the fear of wasting her talent. Marcus listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I joined as a regular medic," he said finally. "No combat aspirations. Just wanted to help people. Then my first deployment, we got hit hard. Mass casualty event. I found myself treating wounds under fire. Bullets everywhere, people screaming, total chaos. He looked at his hands. And I was good at it, staying calm when everything went to hell, making triage decisions in seconds. I saved 11 people that day, lost 3. What did you do after? Ainsley asked quietly. Trained as a combat medic, never looked back. He met her eyes. Because I discovered something about myself. I'm not just good under pressure. I'm necessary. My skills save lives. How could I walk away from that? He leaned forward. The question isn't whether you can do the job. You proved that already. The question is whether you want to. Only you can answer that. Ainsley left the medical facility and walked the perimeter of the base. Watched the sun set over the desert. Called home on the satellite phone. Her mother answered on the 3rd ring. Honey, are you okay? You sound tired. I'm fine, Mom. Just been busy. Ainsley couldn't tell her about the mission, about the kills, about any of it. How's Dad? Same as always. Back still bothers him. He's watching TV right now. Want to talk to him? No, that's okay. Just wanted to hear your voice. They talked about nothing for 20 minutes. Her brother's community college classes, the weather back in Montana, neighbors' gossip, normal life continuing in a world that felt impossibly far away. After hanging up, Ainsley felt crushing isolation. Her family would never understand what she'd experienced. They couldn't. How could she explain firing a rifle at human targets? How could she describe the weight of watching people die by her hand? Some experiences separated you from the people you loved, created chasms that couldn't be crossed with words. She was alone with this decision, truly alone. The next 2 days, she threw herself into training, went to the range every evening and fired hundreds of rounds, pushed her body with long runs carrying heavy packs, tried to exhaust herself enough to sleep without nightmares. It didn't work. The faces still came, but they were becoming less sharp, less immediate, starting to fade into the background noise of memory. On the 6th day, Morse found her at the range. He watched her shoot for 30 minutes without saying a word, just observed her form, her breathing, her groupings. When she finally ran out of ammunition and lowered the rifle, he spoke. You shoot differently now, more efficient, no wasted movement. He paused. Combat does that, burns away everything unnecessary. Ainsley set the rifle down carefully. I can't go back to counting bullets. I've tried. It feels meaningless now. Then don't go back. Morse's voice was matter of fact. Some people are born for certain things. You were born for this. Circumstances just revealed it. What if I fail? What if I can't handle sniper school? You already proved you can handle the worst moment. School is just school. He handed her a water bottle. You've been operating under fire. Everything else is easier by comparison. What if I become someone who kills without feeling it? What if I lose myself? Morse's expression softened. That's actually a good sign. Means you still have your humanity. The day you stop worrying about that is the day you've actually lost yourself. He sat down on a bench, gestured for her to join him. Listen to me carefully. You will carry those faces forever. That's the price. But you also carry the knowledge that you saved Sullivan's life, Marcus's life, Garrett and his entire team. His voice was fierce. Those men have families too. Kids who still have fathers because of what you did. That matters. Ainsley felt something shift inside her chest, a weight settling into place, not disappearing, just finding its proper position. I want to do this, she said quietly. I want to go to sniper school. I want to develop this capability. Morse smiled, first genuine smile she'd seen from him. Then do it, and don't look back. The next morning, Ainsley walked into Lieutenant Garrett's office. He looked up from his paperwork. I want sniper school, sir, if the offer still stands. Garrett's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Satisfaction, maybe, or validation? Already started the paperwork. Had a feeling you'd make the right choice. He pulled out a folder. Army Sniper School at Fort Benning. 7 weeks. One of the highest failure rates in the military. You'll be pushed harder than you've ever been pushed. I understand, sir. Do you? He stood and came around the desk. This isn't a hobby. This is a complete career change. You'll be taking life regularly, carrying weight most people can't imagine. There's no going back once you commit. Ainsley met his eyes steadily. I'm already carrying the weight, sir. Might as well learn to carry it properly. He nodded slowly. Report date is December 15th. That gives you 3 months to prepare. I suggest you use them. Over the next 12 weeks, Ainsley transformed herself. She ran 6 miles every morning with a 60-pound pack, trained with Morse every evening on advanced ballistics, studied wind reading and range estimation, learned about Coriolis effect and how Earth's rotation shifted bullets at extreme distances. Morse shared everything in his notebook and more. Lessons from Grenada and Panama and Desert Storm. Wisdom purchased with blood and mistakes. He held nothing back. The night before she left for Fort Benning, Morse met her at the flight line. 0600, cold desert morning. The C-130 transport sat on the tarmac with engines warming up. They stood facing each other, old warrior and young warrior, teacher and student, father figure and surrogate daughter. Make me proud, kid. Morse's voice was thick with emotion. I will, Sergeant. I promise. Ainsley's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. Morse raised his hand in salute, formal, respectful, final. Ainsley returned it crisply, then turned and walked up the cargo ramp without looking back, because looking back would break her. The C-130 lifted into the sky. Ainsley watched through a window as FOB Griffin shrank below. Morse's silhouette stood alone on the tarmac until the base disappeared entirely. She turned forward. Fort Benning waited. Sniper School waited. A future she'd never imagined becoming was waiting, and she was ready to meet it. Fort Benning, Georgia hit Ainsley like a shock to the system. After months in the Afghan desert, the humidity felt like breathing through wet wool. Rain fell in cold sheets. Everything was green and dense and alien. The training area stretched across wooded terrain that bore no resemblance to the arid landscape where she'd learned to shoot. She reported on December 16, 2012, carrying a single duffel bag and Morse's leather notebook. 25 other students stood in formation outside the Sniper School headquarters. Most were men, infantry veterans with multiple deployments, Rangers with combat patches on their shoulders, Marines who looked like they'd been carved from granite. 2 other women stood in the formation. One was tall and angular with short blonde hair. The other was compact and muscular with skin dark as mahogany. They didn't acknowledge each other. Nobody acknowledged anybody. Everyone was too busy sizing up the competition. A man emerged from the headquarters building. He moved with the economical grace of someone who'd spent decades in combat. Mid-40s, scarred face with a nose that had been broken multiple times, missing his left pinky finger. His eyes were hard and evaluative. I am Sergeant First Class Declan Harrow. I will be your lead instructor for the next 7 weeks. His voice carried across the formation without shouting. I don't give a damn about your background, your rank, or your gender. You are all equally worthless until you prove otherwise through performance. He paced along the formation, stopped in front of a muscular ranger who stood at rigid attention. This course has a 70% failure rate. Most of you will wash out. That's not a threat. It's a statistical fact. He resumed pacing. You will be pushed past your limits, sleep-deprived, underfed, tested in ways that will break your body and your mind. The question is whether you have the will to continue when every fiber of your being wants to quit. He stopped at the center of the formation. There are no participation trophies here, no credit for trying. You either meet the standard or you fail. Welcome to hell. The first week focused on marksmanship fundamentals. 300-yard qualification on day 1. 8 out of 10 hits minimum to continue. Ainsley watched 3 students fail immediately. Their shots scattered across the targets in patterns that revealed fundamental flaws in technique. They were recycled to remedial training. Might rejoin a later class, probably wouldn't. Ainsley shot perfect. 10 out of 10. The other female student, the blonde one, also shot perfect. They made eye contact for the first time. Brief acknowledgement, no words needed. Harrow walked the line checking targets. He paused at Ainsley's, studied the tight grouping, looked at her face with its healing scar from the stone fragments. He said nothing, just moved on. But she saw recognition in his eyes. He knew she'd seen combat. The weapons education was exhaustive. M24 sniper weapon system. Bolt action. 7.62 millimeter NATO. Effective range 800 meters. They stripped it down and reassembled it blindfolded. Learned every component, every failure point, how to clear malfunctions in the dark. The M110 SAS felt familiar in Ainsley's hands. She'd fired Sullivan's rifle under the worst conditions imaginable. This classroom version felt tame by comparison. She worked the action with confidence that came from experience purchased in blood. Week 2 introduced fieldcraft. Constructing ghillie suits from burlap and natural vegetation. Ainsley's methodical nature served her well. She measured thread spacing with precision, matched colors exactly to the Georgia vegetation, created a suit that blended seamlessly with the forest floor. Harrow examined her work. "This looks like something from a museum. Well done, Grant." First praise she'd heard from him. It felt like winning a medal. Then came stalking exercises, the moment where confidence turned to hubris. The objective seemed straightforward. Move 150 meters through wooded terrain toward 2 Walker instructors who were actively searching for students. Reach a firing position undetected. Time limit, 3 hours. Ainsley had shot perfect all week. She'd constructed the best ghillie suit in the class. She'd proven herself under actual combat conditions. This exercise felt almost trivial by comparison. She moved too fast, impatient to demonstrate her skill, confident that her natural talent would carry her through. At 100 meters, a Walker blew his whistle. Sharp, loud, final. "Busted! Stand up, student!" Ainsley stood. Mud and leaves fell from her ghillie suit. Her face burned with humiliation. The Walker approached. He was older, gray in his hair, eyes that had seen everything and were unimpressed by all of it. "What's your name?" "Grant, Sergeant." "Well, Grant, you just got yourself and your entire team killed. Your impatience, your overconfidence, your failure to respect the fundamentals." He pointed back toward the start line. "Walk back and think about what you did wrong." The walk of shame took forever. Other students watched from concealment. She felt their eyes tracking her, felt their judgment. The combat veteran who couldn't handle a basic stalking exercise. Harrow waited at the start line. His expression was worse than anger. It was disappointment. "What happened out there, Grant?" "I moved too fast, Sergeant First Class. I was overconfident." "Yes, you were." He crossed his arms. "Combat gave you a false sense of capability. You think because you performed once under fire, you've mastered the fundamentals. You haven't. You got lucky, and luck runs out." The words hit harder than any curse would have, because they were true. That night, Ainsley lay in her bunk, replaying the failure. The whistle, the walk back, Harrow's disappointment. She'd proven herself in Afghanistan only to fail at a training exercise. What did that say about her actual skill level? Maybe she didn't belong here after all. The next morning, a student approached her at breakfast. He was older than most, early 30s, infantry veteran based on his unit patch, lean and weathered with kind eyes. "Saw you get walked yesterday. I'm Brixton Fallon. Everyone calls me Brick." He sat down without asking. "Happened to me on my first attempt too. Happens to most people. How'd you pass the retest?" slowed down, trusted the process. He took a bite of terrible scrambled eggs. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Rushing gets you killed, or in this case, walked. Over the next 3 days, Ainsley practiced obsessively, spent 8 hours in the woods moving at glacial pace, lay motionless in underbrush while mosquitoes covered every exposed inch of skin, didn't scratch, didn't move, just breathed and waited and learned patience at a cellular level. Morse's words echoed in her memory. Patience defeats panic. The retest came on January 2nd. Same course, same walkers, different Ainsley. She took 2 hours and 40 minutes to cover 150 meters, moved 6 inches at a time at her slowest points, froze completely when walkers passed within 10 feet, became part of the forest rather than something moving through it. She reached the firing position undetected, set up behind her rifle, acquired the target through her scope. Perfect. Harrow was waiting at the extraction point. He looked at her differently now. The disappointment was gone, replaced by something harder to define. Respect, maybe. Better, much better. He actually smiled. Small, brief, but genuine. You learned the lesson. Week 3 brought sleep deprivation. Random wake-ups at 0200, 0330, 0445. Surprise drills in full gear. 4-mile runs followed immediately by weapons qualification. The purpose was testing whether they could maintain shooting accuracy while exhausted. Ainsley discovered that exhaustion made everything harder. Her hands shook. Her vision blurred. Simple calculations took twice as long. But Morse had trained her for this, had pushed her in those evening sessions until she could barely stand. The muscle memory remained even when conscious thought failed. Students continued dropping. Week 3, 26 became 21. Injuries took 2. Voluntary withdrawals took 2. Academic failure took 1 who simply couldn't calculate windage under pressure. Ainsley watched each departure with mixed feelings. Relief that she was still here, fear that she might be next. Week 4 introduced nutritional restriction, MREs only, deliberate calorie deficit, simulating field conditions where food was limited and the mission continued regardless. Ainsley lost 8 pounds in 2 weeks. Her uniforms hung loose, her face became gaunt, but her shooting remained precise. Week 5 brought urban operations, mock-up city terrain with 3-story buildings and narrow alleys, limited sightlines, moving vehicles, pop-up targets that appeared and disappeared in seconds. This was where Ainsley's mathematical mind excelled, calculating angles through building windows, compensating for elevation changes, reading wind patterns disrupted by urban canyons. 3rd floor window, 15-degree downward angle, 280 meters, wind negligible in the urban corridor. She made the calculations automatically, fired. Perfect hit. Harrow watched from behind. Your mind works fast. Good instincts for geometry. Then came the critical test. January 24th. 10 shots. 10 different urban scenarios. Must hit 8 out of 10 minimum to continue. Ainsley approached the firing line, feeling good. Confident, but not overconfident. She'd learned that lesson. Shot 1. Hit. Clean. Shot 2. Hit. Shot 3. Miss. She'd misjudged wind through a building gap. The bullet went 6 inches right. She felt panic rising, pushed it down, breathed, refocused. Shot 4. Hit. Shot 5. Miss. She flinched on the trigger, pulled instead of squeezed. Rookie mistake from someone who should know better. The panic grew stronger. 2 misses already, could only afford 1 more. Shot 6. Miss. Complete mental blank. Forgot to compensate for elevation. The bullet struck 2 feet low. 3 misses, 7 out of 10. Failure. Ainsley lowered the rifle, feeling numb. Around her, other students were finishing their qualifications. Brick shot 9 out of 10. The blonde female student shot perfect again, but Ainsley had failed. Harrow approached. He didn't yell, didn't curse, just looked at her with that devastating disappointment. "See me after formation, Grant." The rest of the day passed in a fog. Classes on range estimation, practical exercises on wind reading. Ainsley went through the motions, but her mind was elsewhere. Replaying those 3 missed shots, analyzing what went wrong, understanding that the problem wasn't technical, it was mental. She choked under pressure. After formation, she reported to Harrow's office. He sat behind a desk covered in paperwork and range cards, gestured for her to sit. "You want to tell me what happened out there?" "I choked, Sergeant First Class, lost focus, made mistakes I shouldn't make." "Why?" His eyes were sharp, probing. "You've performed under actual combat conditions. You've killed enemy fighters while bullets were flying at you. Why did a simple qualification break you?" Ainsley didn't have an answer. Or rather, she had one, but didn't want to admit it. "I don't know, Sergeant First Class." "Yes, you do." He leaned forward. "You're exhausted, sleep-deprived, undernourished. Your body is breaking down and your mind is following. This is exactly what the course is designed to do. Find your breaking point. See if you quit or push through." He stood up. "You have one retest opportunity. Tomorrow. Same qualification. If you fail again, you're recycled. Might join the next class, might not. Up to you to decide if you have what it takes." Ainsley left his office feeling hollow, walked back to the barracks in the cold rain. Other students were studying or cleaning weapons or sleeping. She sat on her bunk and stared at the wall. She could quit, just walk away, tell them this wasn't for her, go back to logistics and count bullets and live a safe, predictable life. Nobody would blame her. Sniper school defeated better soldiers than her every single week. At 2100 hours, she pulled out Morse's notebook, flipped through pages of wisdom accumulated over 25 years. Wind drift calculations, range estimation techniques, notes on breath control. On the inside back cover, she found the inscription she'd read a dozen times. But tonight, the words hit different. "Ainsley, you'll hit a wall. Everyone does. When you want to quit, remember, the only failure is stopping before you're finished. Everything else is just a temporary setback. You've got this. You've always had this." Callahan Morse. He'd known. Before she'd even left Afghanistan, he'd known she would reach this moment, this crisis point where quitting seemed easier than continuing. And he'd left her this message, this reminder that failure was only permanent if she chose to make it so. Ainsley stood up, grabbed her rifle case, walked out into the rain toward the night range. The range safety wasn't expecting anyone, but he unlocked the facility without question. She spent 2 hours in the darkness running dry fire drills. No ammunition, just mechanics, breathing, trigger press, follow through, over and over until the movements felt automatic again, until her mind quieted and her body remembered what it knew. At 0130, she returned to the barracks, slept for 3 hours, best sleep she'd had in days. The retest qualification happened at 0800. Same course, same scenarios, different Ainsley. She approached it like she'd approached that stalking retest. Slow, methodical, no rushing, no panic, just fundamentals executed with precision. Shot 1, hit. Shot 2, hit. Shot 3, hit. Compensated properly for wind this time. Shot 4, hit. Shot 5, hit. Smooth trigger press, no flinch. Shot 6, hit. Perfect elevation compensation. She continued through all 10 shots. 10 hits, perfect score. Harrow examined her target, looked at her face, nodded once. "There's the shooter I expected. Don't disappear again." Week 6 brought advanced fieldcraft. Multi-day exercises with minimal support. Students operated in pairs, conducting simulated missions across Georgia backwoods. Ainsley partnered with Brick. They worked well together. His infantry experience complemented her precision shooting. Her mathematical calculations helped him with navigation. They spent 48 hours in the field with limited food and no sleep, moved through terrain while instructors actively hunted them, set up firing positions and engaged targets at extreme range, extracted without detection. Brick noticed the change in her. "You're different after that qualification failure. Steadier somehow." "Had to break before I could be whole." Ainsley scanned their route with binoculars. "Needed to remember I'm not special, just someone willing to do the work." "That's exactly what makes you special," Brick said quietly. Week 7 brought the final exercise, the culmination of everything they'd learned. 48 hours. Partner operation. Real-world scenario as realistic as training could make it. Ainsley and Brick received their briefing at 2100 hours on February 3rd. Infiltrate simulated enemy compound. Identify specific targets. Engage from concealment at ranges exceeding 300 meters. Exfiltrate undetected while Walker instructors actively hunted them. Failure meant recycling the entire course. 7 weeks of suffering for nothing. They inserted at night. Georgia woods at 38 degrees Fahrenheit, light rain, visibility minimal. 4 miles to the compound through terrain that would conceal or reveal them depending on their skill. Ainsley led navigation, used terrain features and pace count. No GPS, no electronic aids, just map and compass and decades-old techniques that still worked. They moved at glacial pace, 6 hours to cover 4 miles. Walkers passed within 20 feet multiple times. Never saw them. At 0300 on February 4th, they reached their overwatch position. 380 meters from the compound. Good concealment, multiple routes for exfiltration. They settled into their hide site and waited. 11.5 hours motionless. Rain continued. Temperature dropped to 35 degrees. Ainsley's body went numb from cold and immobility. Didn't matter. Patience defeats panic. Brick struggled more. Infantry guys were used to movement, decisive action. Waiting without purpose went against their nature, but he trusted the process, stayed still, let the discomfort exist without fighting it. At 14:30 hours, their target appeared. Role player in compound courtyard. Range confirmed at 382 meters. Wind pushing left to right at 6 miles per hour. Temperature and humidity already calculated. Ainsley made the final adjustments. Windage compensation. Elevation. Breathing slowed to almost nothing. Crosshairs settled. Finger took up trigger slack. The shot broke clean. Through the scope, she watched the simulation round strike center mass. Perfect. Brick followed 8 seconds later. Also perfect. They immediately began exfiltration. Walkers would converge on the compound within minutes. Had to move fast but remain undetected. 8 miles to extraction point via a longer, more concealed route. Ainsley and Brick moved like ghosts, used every bit of terrain, every shadow, every fold in the ground. Walkers passed them multiple times, once within 5 feet, never saw them. They reached extraction at 2200 hours, 14 hours after insertion, completely undetected. Mission complete. The observer instructor at extraction actually smiled. That was textbook. One of the best stalking and shooting combinations I've seen in recent classes. Well done. Graduation day arrived February 8th, cold and clear. 26 students had started. 9 stood in formation to receive their sniper tabs. 65% failure rate, higher than average. This had been a particularly brutal class. Ainsley stood at attention as the commandant approached. He pinned the tab to her uniform. Small piece of cloth that represented 7 weeks of suffering, hundreds of hours of training, pushing past every limit she thought she had. Congratulations, Specialist Grant. You are now a qualified United States Army sniper. Her parents watched via video link. Her mother cried. Her father sat speechless. Her brother sent a text that made her laugh. You're officially the scariest person I know." After the ceremony, Lieutenant Garrett appeared. She hadn't known he was coming. The SEAL team leader had flown from California specifically for her graduation. "SEALs don't forget debts." He handed her a challenge coin. SEAL Trident on one side, team number on the other. "You saved Sullivan's life. Mine. Everyone's. That makes you family. Always." He offered his hand. She shook it. "Doors open if you ever want to join our world. Just say the word." "I appreciate it, sir, but I found my path." He nodded, understood, respected it. A familiar voice called from behind. "Heard someone graduated sniper school." Ainsley turned. Corporal Garrett Sullivan stood there in dress uniform, his left arm still in a sling, but standing tall. The Montana sniper who'd been hit in Operation Valkyrie, whose rifle she'd picked up. "Reaper." She hadn't known he'd come. "Took a while to track you down." He extended his good hand. "Wanted to say thank you in person. You gave me a chance to see my kids grow up. That matters more than you know." They shook hands. Two snipers, Montana-born, forged in the same fire. "You earned this." Sullivan handed her something. His M110 SAS scope ring, the one from that night, battle-scarred metal. "Carried this through 3 deployments. Figure you earned the right to carry it forward." Ainsley's throat tightened. "I can't take this." "Already got a new one," he smiled. "Besides, every time you look through a scope, you'll remember, we hold the line, all of us." He saluted once, then walked away. Garrett turned back to Ainsley. "Good hunting, Grant. Make us proud." That evening, Ainsley called Afghanistan on a satellite phone. It took 15 minutes to get connected to FOB Griffin, another 10 to locate Morse. When his gravelly voice finally came through, she felt tears burning. "Sergeant Morse." "Grant, that you, kid? Just wanted to let you know I graduated. 9 out of 26 made it. I was one of them." Silence on the line. Then his voice came back thick with emotion. "Told you so. Knew you had it." He paused. "I'm proud of you, Ainsley. Your father should be too." "I almost quit, Sergeant. Week 5. I was ready to walk away." "But you didn't. That's what matters. You chose to stay." Another pause. "Now go save some lives. That's an order." "Yes, Sergeant." "And Grant, thank you for letting me be part of this, for giving me a chance to do it right with someone." His voice cracked. Ainsley understood. She'd given him redemption, a chance to mentor someone properly, to do for her what he'd failed to do for his own daughter. "Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." They talked for another 10 minutes, then static consumed the connection, and he was gone. Ainsley received deployment orders the next day. 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, precision marksman attached to direct action teams. Deploy date, April 2013. Back to Afghanistan. She was going home. Full circle, to the place where this had started, where she discovered what she was capable of becoming. The months between graduation and deployment passed in intensive additional training, advanced urban operations, helicopter insertions, vehicle interdiction, every scenario the Rangers might encounter. Ainsley absorbed it all. She deployed in April, landed at Bagram Air Base, and immediately felt the familiar weight of the heat, the dust, the smell of diesel and cordite and war. But this time she wasn't counting bullets. She was using them. Her first mission came within a week. Overwatch position during a high-value target raid, 600 meters from the objective, protecting her team from concealment. Through the scope, she watched Rangers flow through the compound with practiced efficiency, watched for threats, waited with infinite patience. A fighter emerged on a rooftop with an RPG. She saw him before anyone else could react. Calculated range and wind automatically. Fired. He dropped. The RPG never launched. The raid continued without complications. Lieutenant Garrett's words proved true. This was her path. Protecting teammates from positions they couldn't see. making shots they couldn't make, being the guardian angel they didn't know was watching. Over the following months, Ainsley conducted dozens of missions. Each one reinforced what she'd learned: patience, precision, purpose. She carried Morse's notebook on every operation, added her own observations, her own lessons learned, began writing wisdom to pass forward someday. In October, email came from Fort Benning Personnel Office. Master Sergeant Callahan Morse had died, heart attack in his sleep. October 12th, age 68, no family to notify. Ainsley was listed as emergency contact. She sat in her bunk holding the printed email, read it 5 times, felt the grief settle like a physical weight in her chest. Morse was gone, the man who'd believed in her, who'd given her permission to be more than she thought she could be, who'd seen her as the daughter he'd lost. She requested emergency leave. Denied. Active deployment. Mission-critical personnel. Couldn't be spared. Instead, she wrote him a letter. 10 pages of everything she wanted to say. Everything he'd meant. How he'd changed her life. How she carried his lessons every single day. How she thought of him as the father figure her own injured, distant father had never been. She burned the letter in a trash can outside her bunk, watched the pages curl and blacken, sent the smoke up to wherever he was, hoped somehow he knew. She kept his notebook, carried it on every mission, the leather cover growing more worn with each deployment, a physical connection to the man who'd changed everything. In December, her unit rotation brought her back to FOB Griffin for resupply and rest. The base had changed, new faces, new buildings, but the memorial wall remained. She found Morse's name on a new brass plaque, Master Sergeant Callahan Morse, 25 years of service, Grenada, Panama, Desert Storm. She stood at attention, saluted formally, whispered words only he would hear. "I made you proud, Sergeant. I'm holding the line, just like you taught me." In January 2014, Ainsley received new orders. Assistant instructor for basic marksmanship, training new soldiers, passing forward the knowledge that had been given to her. Her first class included a nervous logistics specialist from Tennessee, Private Meadow Sutton, 22 years old, uncertain, capable of more than she knew. Ainsley handed her an M4 carbine. "Let's see what you've got." Meadows' first grouping was tight, natural talent visible immediately. She looked up surprised. "I didn't know I could do that." Most people don't know what they're capable of until circumstances demand it. Ainsley smiled, remembered herself 18 months ago. "You're different, natural shooter. That's rare." Over the following weeks, Ainsley worked with Meadow, saw the same progression she'd experienced, uncertainty becoming confidence, fear becoming purpose, a logistics specialist discovering she could be more. One evening after training, Ainsley gave Meadow a small notebook, new one, leather cover. Inside, she'd written lessons from Morse's notebook and lessons from her own experience. The cover inscription read, "Patience defeats panic. Everyone holds a line when needed. AG." Meadow opened it carefully, flipped through pages filled with calculations, sketches, handwritten wisdom. Her eyes widened as she recognized what she was holding. "Sergeant Grant, I don't understand. Why me?" "Because 2 years ago someone saw potential in me I didn't see in myself." Ainsley's voice was steady. "Gave me permission to be more than I thought possible. Now I'm giving you that same permission." Meadow's eyes glistened. "What if I'm not ready?" "Nobody's ready. You just become ready by doing." Ainsley started to walk away, then stopped. "Oh, and Meadow, when you get to sniper school, and you will, remember, patience defeats panic." She left Meadow standing there, clutching the notebook with reverent care. That evening, Ainsley sat alone watching the sunset over FOB Griffin. Same desert, same mountains, same sky that had witnessed her transformation from supply sergeant to sniper. She thought about the path that had brought her here. Helicopter crash, Sullivan falling, the choice to pick up that rifle, every moment of fear and doubt and determination that had forged her into something new. She wasn't counting bullets anymore. She was making every single one count. Morse had given her permission to discover her potential. Now she was giving that same permission to others. The legacy didn't end. It continued, passed from teacher to student, generation to generation, each one carrying the weight and the wisdom forward. The sun touched the horizon, painted the sky orange and gold, beautiful and terrible at the same time. Like war, like life, like everything worth doing. Ainsley stood, stretched, felt the familiar weight of Morse's notebook in her cargo pocket, felt Sullivan's scope ring on the chain around her neck, felt the weight of the faces she carried, the lives she'd taken and the lives she'd saved, the person she'd been and the person she'd become. She had held the line when the moment demanded it, and she would continue holding it, because that's what warriors did, what guardians did, what people who refused to quit did. The desert wind picked up, carried sand and memories. Ainsley turned and walked back toward the barracks. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students, new opportunities to pass forward what had been given to her. But tonight, she simply carried the gratitude for a mentor who'd believed in her, for circumstances that had revealed her, for the courage to become something she never imagined. She was Ainsley Grant, former logistics specialist, combat sniper,